So, you want to learn how to successfully run a pendulum impact test and don't know where to start? Well, you've come to the right place. The friendly team here at TLK Productions have compiled an easy hands-on learning experience that will have you sending plastic parts across the room in no time. In this video, we'll be covering two basic pendulum impact tests, the ASTM D256 ISO 180 equivalent, which is also known as the Izod impact test. This test has two variations, one using a notched test specimen and the other using an unnotched test specimen. The other test we will talk about in this video is the ASTM D6110 ISO 179 equivalent Charpy impact test. Before starting this test, or any other test for that matter, you should always ask yourself, what am I solving for in this particular test? The answer for that question in impact testing is very simple: energy. You are solving for the amount of energy it takes for a plastic part to fail. In the case of the testing equipment at Ferris State University, the unit of energy measurement is foot-pounds. There are three energies involved in a plastic part failure. The first energy is the most important and largest of the three, and we give it the name the energy of initiation. This is the energy that it takes for the frozen layer, the outside of a plastic part, to fail. The next energy is the energy of propagation. This is the energy that it takes for the initial failure to propagate and move across the part. The final energy is the energy it takes to throw the part. In other words, this is the amount of energy necessary for the pendulum arm to throw the failed part after it has completely failed. The reasoning for having two variations of the Izod impact test directly relates to the first energy for a plastic part failure. By subtracting the value of the energy that a notched sample takes to fail from the unnotched sample's energy of failure, you can obtain the value for the energy of initiation. So now that you have the foundation of the impact test, you are now ready to complete your own test. First things first, before entering the lab, proper safety procedures have to be met. You will have to wear a lab coat and safety glasses that meet the ANSI Z87 standards due to the fact that there will be flying test specimens in the room. You will also be using the Testing Machines Incorporated notching cutter, model 2205, to be cutting notches for the Charpy and Izod notch samples. Be sure to keep your fingers away from the cutting blade and do not reach underneath the safety guard. There will be more safety information offered throughout this presentation, so be sure to keep your ears open. Now that you have the basic safety procedure done, you can now begin testing. We'll first begin by explaining the procedure for the Izod impact test. The test specimen for the Izod test should measure 2 1/2 inches long and 1/8 inch thick. In order to test a notched sample, it has to be notched by cutting it on one of the Testing Machines Incorporated notching cutters. This is done by loading the 2 1/2 inch long sample into the vise on the right hand side of the cutting machine on edge like shown. Be sure to use the guide so that the blade will cut the test specimen in the center. Turn on the cutter and then set the vise in motion towards the cutting blade by flipping the toggle. Set the vise and unload the test sample after the part has cleared the guard. Set the vise back into the starting position after this is done. Next, take the steel block from the machine and place it into the Mitutoyo measuring gauge and zero it out. This steel block measures 0.4 inches. Now take the newly notched sample and load it into the V-shaped base of the measuring unit. Make sure that your samples are within 0.010 of an inch tolerance. Now that you have your notched and unnotched samples, go over to the Testing Machines Incorporated impact tester and make sure that 2-pound Izod pendulum arm is secured to the hinge with both bolts. If you need to change the pendulum arm, simply take out these bolts and remove the arm like shown. Place the new pendulum arm in the same place as the old and tighten it down with both bolts. Next, rotate the pendulum arm back until it locks into the quick release. Zero the indicator needle on the front of the machine and release the pendulum arm. Catch the arm on the back swing and take the reading of the needle. This is an error that is an inevitable factor due to the friction of the arm. Simply note this error and put it in your data. Retract the arm and make sure it is locked in place and ready for your first test. Load your first sample into the base so it is facing on edge like so. Make sure the notch is facing towards the pendulum arm for the notch test as shown here. Use the reference block of aluminum to make sure that your test specimen is at the right height by putting the cutout block into the test specimen. If you are doing an unnotched sample, load the specimen in the same manner and use the reference block to match the top of the specimen to the block. Be sure the needle indicator is zeroed out. Now you can release the pendulum arm. Be sure to stop this on the backswing and take a reading of the needle and record it. Remove the test sample that is left and repeat. If the 2-pound pendulum arm does not cause your part to fail, but rather stops the pendulum in its tracks, put a heavier arm on. Don't forget to record the inevitable error of the friction due to the machine. Another problem that you may run into is what's called a hinge break. A hinge break looks like this. If this occurs, record the reading from the indicator needle, but note that it was a hinge break. You may want to use a heavier pendulum arm if this becomes a recurring issue. Now that you are done with the Izod impact test, you are now ready for the Charpy test. You will be using a 5-inch test specimen for the Charpy impact test, and will be notching them in the same manner as you did the Izod notch sample, but be sure to use the larger guide so the notch is in the center of the specimen. Also measure the material remaining in the same manner. All Charpy specimens are notched. Once you have notched your test specimen, make sure the Charpy pendulum arm is in the testing unit. If not, just change it like you did with the other Izod pendulum arms. Record the frictional error as well. Retract the pendulum arm. When you load the sample, load it into the unit like so. Make sure the notch is facing away from the pendulum arm and the part is centered in the braces. No pressure should be applied to the test specimen. Double check that the indicator needle is zeroed and release the pendulum arm, making sure to catch it on the backswing. Record your data and repeat as necessary. Now that you've successfully done both tests and collected all your data, all that is left is to clean up and return the lab to a cleaner order than what you found it. Dispose of broken test samples and be sure that the Mintatoya gauge is turned off as well as the cutters. Thank you for watching. We hope that you learned something and had fun along the way. Happy impact testing! This has been a presentation of TLK Productions.